I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. This is London reporting, the Daily Telegraph keeping a live blog of events on the Ukraine crisis and the Crimean crisis. At 2:55, 3 a.m. was the deadline, kicked around all day, between the Russian forces in Crimea and those Ukrainian forces that had refused to either come over or swear allegiance or surrender their weapons or open their bases. The London papers are following this very carefully. They write that the deadline is looming. According to Ukrainian TV, 22 Ukrainian units in Crimea are still guarding their bases. That is, they have not surrendered to the overwhelming Russian force now in Crimea. Crimea is a Russian property, an autonomous republic that was handed over by Khrushchev to Ukraine in 1953. Oh, you know, a Politburo, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. It is a Russian peninsula, won by Russia during, you might recall, war with Turkey about 150 years ago. And the Black Sea Fleet is based on Crimea. There are many Russian citizens in Crimea. It's a Navy base, not unlike San Diego. And the Russian citizens in Crimea have been campaigning, calling for Russian protection from Ukraine. Russia pays, or paid rent to Ukraine for the base, the Russian naval bases in Crimea. It is a vital piece of the Russian military posture, which is why we see there are so many troops there. Yes, they don't have badges, but those are Russian special forces. That is not the whole story, but it is the beginning story of the Ukraine crisis. Also reporting a London Telegraph that the president was in a National Security Council meeting until late this evening, very unusually, till about 9:30. This is a 9:39 East Coast time report from Telegraph. The president coming out of the meeting is said to have discussed with his National Security Council ways to, quote, reinforce that the Russians still have an opportunity to take immediate steps to de-escalate the situation, or they face further political and economic repercussions from the international community, end quote. Mr. Fund of the National Review Online and David Drucker of Washington Examiner join me and my colleague Thaddeus McCotter at WJR. Mr. Fund, the Obama administration right now is not explaining clearly to the American people, I understand they're in meetings, much on the phone to Europe, why we should care. Does the president need to do that, John? Good evening to you.
Well, I don't think the president needs to say that this is a crisis that could lead to war or something that has a direct impact on the U.S. economy. What I do think he has to emphasize to the American people is, even though there is no direct threat to the U.S., our allies in Europe, which we do depend on for a great deal, are captive to Russian oil and gas shipments, and if Russia becomes an expansionist power trying to intimidate its neighbors, that is of direct concern to us.
Mr. Drucker, good evening to you. Before I turn you both over to Thaddeus McCotter, your understanding of this today, Washington is keen on the partisanship these days, Republicans versus Democrats, and watching the White House thrash through a foreign policy crisis that is very far away and doesn't immediately threaten American lives. Is this something that Washington is ready for these days, David? Is it ready to revert to Cold War logic, stand arm in arm against the Soviet bear?
Well, good evening, John. And actually in Washington, there's a lot of concern about Russia, and there's actually has been a lot of attention paid to Russia in some quarters. It still animates a lot of Republican foreign policy, not all of it, but much of it, and there's a healthy think tank community in D.C., obviously, and many foreign policy thinkers pay attention to it. So this is probably the one place in the country where you're going to have an audience for this. Now, I doubt that the president, at least past this prologue, is going to spend too much time explaining this or discussing it with the American public. And I agree with John. It's not as though he has to prepare the country for the threat of war or major upheaval. But I suspect that the reason the president is so concerned about what is happening and feels the need to be, at least appear to be somewhat aggressive, is because American credibility is important if you look at this from the perspective of his administration trying to manage another Israeli-Palestinian peace process, negotiations with Iran, and China getting a little uppity in the South China Sea, vis-a-vis Japan and other neighbors there, where it's trying to control a lot of sea and shipping lanes. And I think that the president is sensitive to us looking feckless because it could hurt our position in these other situations. And I also noticed one last thing. In the interview that the president gave to Jeffrey Goldberg of Bloomberg View, he made it a point when asked about our credibility after the ignored red line that he set in Syria. He went to great pains to explain that he knows for a fact that everybody still thinks our threat of force is credible. So this has to be something that is on his mind to some degree.
Thaddeus?
Yes, this might not lead to war with Russia, with Mr. Putin going into the Ukraine on behalf of the ethnic Russians, any more than Hitler going into Czechoslovakia to protect the Sudetenland Germans necessarily dragged the United States into war at the time. What is the problem in Washington, where they do not plan for a contingency such as this? They scramble to come up with sanctions, even in the wake of Georgia. They tell us that it's, well, we just got to get through this crisis. Maybe Mr. Putin will back down. Why has it taken this event in the Ukraine to wake up Washington policymakers to at least deal with this situation, let alone plan for future revanchism by the Russian bear?
Mr. Fund?
Well, I think what we need to do is exercise as much leverage as we can in trying to undermine Russia's financial and geopolitical credibility. Luckily, the markets have responded. Russian stock market has lost $60 billion in value in just one day. Gazprom, which is their natural gas monopoly, lost $15 billion. They've had to seen a run on the ruble. I think the best thing we can do is to exercise the influence that we didn't have with the old Soviet Union, which was largely self-sufficient, and basically change fundamentally the way that investors and rating agencies view Russia. Two ways to do that would be to kick them out of the G8 because they don't really belong there. They're not really a modern economy. And start making tentative moves to kicking them out of the World Trade Organization, because what the Russians are practicing is not trade, they're practicing military aggression.
David?
Well, I think the reason that Putin and Medvedev have been able to get away with everything that they have is because most of this has happened in the context of the U.S. being bogged down, or at least very focused on Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's left the country extremely war-weary or even just conflict-weary. And I think that we have used Russia and felt that we needed Russia to deal with Iran, and lately, of course, to deal with Syria. And there was a lot of hope, I think, in both the previous and the current administration that Russia would emerge as some sort of functioning democracy that would be in the Western orbit. And I think that it's possible with this incursion in the Ukraine coming right after the Olympics, where Russia was hoping to sort of show itself to the world as an emerging power, that it's the kind of thing that maybe we finally couldn't ignore. But I would say that it's early for that. We really don't know how this thing's going to play out. I
want to come back, gentlemen, to the politics at hand. David has a column up today about the Republican prospects for taking over the Senate in 2014. The midterm is going to come whether we like it or not with the crisis in Ukraine. So I want to apply what we can to the international crisis, to partisan politics, whether there are strong candidates or weak candidates in the Senate especially, or in the House of Representatives, to take advantage of or to be defensive about the events of these last days. David Drucker of Washington Examiner, John Fund of the National Review Online, and my colleague and co-host Thaddeus McCotter at WJR in Detroit. I'm John Batchelor.